Hi, my dear friends. Some Torah, for Parshas BeHa'alosecha. The stories in Tanakh are quite deliberate. If there's a private episode in a person's life who appears in the Chumash, there's no necessary reason for the Torah to relate that story unless it has relevance to our lives as a people. And so that's why I want to look at a very private family affair about Moshe that is recorded in the Torah at the very end of our Parsha. Vatitaber Miriam ve'Aaron b'Moshe. Miriam was speaking with her brother Aharon about their brother Moshe in a seemingly disparaging way, or a critical way, al odot ha'isha hakushit asher lakach ki isha chushit lakach, regarding the Cushite woman that Moshe had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Now, what is the relevance to us? It's a private affair. We don't know very much about Moshe's personal life, nor should we. As long as he led a moral life, why is every detail of his life important to us? He is the giver of our Torah. Let me ask you a few other questions. Why does the story appear particularly here at this juncture of the Torah? Another question. Hashem responded to Miriam and Aaron by explaining to them that they didn't fully appreciate Moshe's great level of prophecy. And that's why they made a mistake about looking at Moshe critically. What does that have to do with the Cushite woman that he married? What's the connection? And finally, just a technical question, the words of the verse seem to be completely redundant. They spoke about Moshe regarding the Cushite woman that he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. What do you need that whole second phrase? Obviously he married a Cushite woman, otherwise they wouldn't have anything to speak about. There is much stated by our sages, and we refer you to Rashi. That seems to be the first initial response that we would have, is to look at Rashi, who says that Moshe was living a life of celibacy because he had to be prepared for a constant barrage of divine communication, and Miriam and Aharon were critical of that. We also are prophets, God communicates with us, and yet we can still continue living family lives. Why does Moshe feel he's any different? But when you look at the simple communication of the text, that doesn't seem to emerge, because they weren't criticizing Moshe for the wife that he had divorced or that he was separated from, but rather they are critical of Moshe for having married a Cushite woman. So let's look at the simple import of the text as some of the other commentaries do, and let's derive a lesson. We have to look at the context of this story. The previous episode in the Torah, in chapter 11 of the book of Numbers, presents us a narrative of a very dissatisfied Jewish people. They are upset, they are frustrated, they want to eat meat. For some reason, they've had enough of the manna, of this miraculous food that falls from heaven. And they say to Moshe, we've had enough of this stuff. We want a good steak. We want to sink our teeth into something real. And Moshe is also very upset. God is upset. God expresses his anger. And Moshe is upset as well. He turns to Hashem and complains about having been given a job that is impossible for him to lead. There's no possible way for me, says Moshe, to provide for this people. And he says, I'd rather die than have to endure this kind of embittered leadership. Why was Moshe so upset? Hadn't he endured the complaints of the people before? Wouldn't he argue for this combative people in the future? Why is it here that he's just ready to give up in a fit of frustration? Rav Clonimus Kalman Halevi Epstein, in his Sefer Ma'or Vashemesh, explains that Moshe here was not angry at the Jewish people. He wasn't frustrated at them. He was frustrated at himself and the dissonance which he felt between himself and his people. He was upset at the disparity, because in order for a leader to effectively lead, there needs to be a commonality between the leader and the people. But at this point in his life, after having gone through the entire Sinai experience of receiving God's Torah in a face-to-face encounter, Moshe had become so otherworldly in his perspective that he could no longer relate to the experiences and sentiments of a people who were entrenched in a physical world. His frustration was not that the people wanted meat. His frustration was that he couldn't relate to that desire. If I can't relate to this people, how can I help them? How can I lead a people to whom I feel no kindred connection? Now, Reb Epstein adds that this is why our sages tell us in Tractate Yoma that a community should not appoint a leader over themselves unless that leader has what's called a kupa shel shratzim. He's got to have skeletons in his closet. Now, what does that mean? It means that in order for a leader to effectively lead, he needs to be able to be empathetic to the shortcomings of his flock. He needs to understand what it means to be human. He has to have feet of clay so that he can relate to the people to whom he wishes to provide guidance. He has to see the same imperfections within himself. Hashem told Moshe that the solution to this dilemma that he was experiencing, he says, go ahead, choose 70 wise men. They will be your helpers. They will help lead the people for you. They won't be as otherworldly as you, Moshe, and so they'll be able to relate better to the people. And in a sense, what Hashem was telling him is, let's create a conduit to connect this gaping expanse that is between you and the nation. We'll place the 70 elders in between. They'll have enough imperfection and physicality to relate to the people, and they'll be able to connect to you as well as being righteous spiritual leaders. Immediately after these events, now we get to the story of Miriam's disparagement of Moshe to her brother Aharon. Because immediately in the aftermath of this story, Moshe has to look at himself in the mirror and imagine the type of frustration he still must have been feeling after this whole story was over. He's truly vexed over not being able to connect to his people. He had nothing in his life to tether him to the physical world. That in itself doesn't bother him, but the realization that he couldn't relate to his beloved brethren really did bother him. And so in an effort to try to come down to earth, he marries a new wife. And I want you to try and appreciate who this wife is. Many would translate the word Cushite as either Ethiopian or a black-skinned woman. But there's a word in Hebrew that is derivative of the word Cush or Cushi, in that if you double the letters Kaf Shin, it has the verb lekashkesh. Now, what does that word mean? If you look throughout rabbinic literature, lekashkesh means either to wag, like wagging the tail of an animal, or it also means, if you have a clapper and a bell, it means that a bell makes a loud clanging sound when it moves back and forth against the bell. Lekashkesh means to make a loud noise, using a clapping sound in a noise-making instrument. And I believe that perhaps what the Torah is relating to us is that Moshe felt he needed a jolt back to the physical world. And so he married a wife who would be Mikashkesh, who would bring him back to the realities and to the vicissitudes and to the imperfections of this physical world by bringing him back into a domestic kind of lifestyle. The Torah is relating that this is how Moshe felt he could remedy the situation by being more involved in the physical. Miriam and Aaron couldn't understand Moshe's new behavior. The reason why the Torah repeats the phrase ki isha chushit lakach is because this just happened. Previously, Moshe may have been married to Tzipporah, but Tzipporah was no longer in his life. And all of a sudden, in his advanced age, he takes a new wife. They don't understand. Why does Moshe feel this is necessary as a response to his feelings of otherworldliness because he is a prophet? We're prophets too. We didn't need to take such drastic measures in order to bring us back down to earth, in order to tether us to something in the physical world. And that's why Hashem has to speak to them and explain to them that you don't understand Moshe's level of prophecy. And I think taken in this light, there is quite a significant lesson for the future of our people. It teaches us that in order to help others, you need to first relate to them and understand where they're coming from. That doesn't mean that one has to have undergone every single experience that the other person has. But it does mean that one cannot be too much of a tzaddik. You can't be too righteous in order to help the other. I must at least relate to the challenges that the other is facing, because I too have struggled with those very same vices and weaknesses. It boils down to what we call the word empathy. And I believe that Hashem was very quick to come to Moshe's defense directly, because Hashem too does that with us. In our very existence, Hashem lowers himself in order to relate to us. In this sense, Moshe's taking of a Cushite wife was no different from what Hashem does every time he allows himself to get involved with our lives, with our sundry, prosaic, ordinary issues. Many people are suffering right now. And as we begin recovery from our pandemic, we're going to be discovering many of our neighbors and friends and community members have had a rough going at it, perhaps more so than us. Many have undergone financial stresses, others have not. Many have undergone psychological and emotional trauma through all of this, while others have done just fine. The way for the one to help the other is to at least relate to what the other is going through. This will be one of the greatest challenges as we recover together as a community. And so our recovery should be in a healthy way. We need to pick up the pieces together. Those with a stronger right hand should help the lefties, and those with a stronger left hand should help the righties. It's not now a time to judge, a time to blame, or a time to exclude. We can all recover, but we have to do it together. Our efforts as a community, may these efforts help us understand each other and to help bring us to the ultimate redemption. May we see it b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen. I wish you a beautiful Shabbos, whether you're together with family, whether you're not together with them, whether you're in a shul, whether you're davening in the privacy of your own home. We'll see you soon, Bezrat Hashem. Take care. Shabbat Shalom.